Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MerlinCast, where I just kind of talk about a variety of things. I know it's been a while. I'm actually taking some time off, so there might not be any official videos out for at least a couple more days, but I still wanted to kind of do something kind of chill and laid back, so we'll do a podcast. I've got a couple things I found I want to talk about, and then I'll just kind of see where I go after that. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the Guardians of the Galaxy teaser for the second movie, and I have to say, for the little we got to see, looks pretty cool. Drax got some pretty funny lines, and I'll tell you, when I saw Baby Groot, I'll tell you, I'm a guy, I don't normally squee. In fact, I rarely squee. In fact, I don't even really use the term squee that often, but when I saw it, I was like, oh my god, it's a cat. It was like, and Baby Groot is adorable. So, I mean, we can't deny that. So, yeah, it was like, a minute and a half teaser, but it was still pretty cool. I'm looking forward to it because, if you guys don't know this, Guardians of the Galaxy is probably my favorite Marvel movie. I just thought it was this really well-balanced sense of fun and adventure, and I guess comparatively, it's really not as serious as some of the other Marvel movies, and you could even argue maybe not technically better made in some ways, like the writing was still simplistic, but it was just a lot of fun. It knew what it was, it owned it, and I enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to the second one. I'll be honest, I think that the bar is set pretty high for it to do better, but Marvel has been pretty consistently good at the very least, so we've got to give them that. In line with the trailer talk, we saw Old Man Logan, aka, what it's really called is Wolverine 3. I have to say, this one looks like it's definitely downplaying things significantly, not really that over the top, and I suspected that Mr. Sinister was going to be involved in the next movie, and I don't know if it's going to be Wolverine. I know that there was a hint in the last X-Men movie, so I'm not 100% sure. They've been keeping his involvement somewhat secret, but as you guys know, I love Mr. Sinister, so whether or not he's going to be involved in this is fine. I know this is probably going to be Hugh Jackman's last movie where he plays Wolverine, and he is getting a bit up there, but he still, looks more ripped, and it's kind of funny, when it comes to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, way back in the day, when when I saw X-Men 1 back in 2000 when I was a kid, 15 years, wow, 16 years, time goes by, and I remember it took me a while to really warm up to him. Like, I thought he was a good actor, and he did a good job with the part, but, for me, Wolverine's always going to be the short, stocky, really gruff, not so good-looking guy. Honestly, my ideal version of him was from the 90s cartoon. That's always going to be Wolverine to me, but really, as Hugh Jackman has gotten older, he's become more gruff, he's become more buff, he just looks the part more, and by the time he's Old Man Logan, it's like, you know what, he was born to play Wolverine. Yeah, the trailer didn't really give us too much. I mean, we know Professor X is involved. I'm guessing that X-23 is going to be there as well. She's probably going to maybe pass the torch if they don't want to, cast a new Wolverine so soon, which I can understand. That's smart. Got to give him some time. I mean, I know that he said it's his last movie, but let's be honest. We thought Patrick Stewart probably wouldn't be doing these things, but they want to be involved as long as they can, so I don't know. I'm not really sure how I'll think about it yet, but the Wolverine movies have had a very mixed success rate. I mean, the first movie is legendarily bad, just a bad movie, and fans hate it. It's like up there as probably like one of the most disappointing, offensive comic book movies ever. And the second one is one that people generally liked, so we'll see if this one is actually an amazing one. We'll give it some time. Kind of going along with movie news, not exactly news, but the big new Marvel movie coming out is going to be Doctor Strange, who's a character that I've always liked, and we've got Benedict Cumberbatch as the title character, and he looks the part, he looks good, and I will admit, I saw the trailer, and it looks exciting. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I've got a feeling that I think there's going to be two modes for this one. I think that Doctor Strange is either going to be like, one of the best ones again that's going to blow everybody's mind, or it's just going to be decent. I think there's really I don't think it's going to be bad, but that's pretty much the variation, and the reason I bring it up is because it comes out on my birthday, so I'll be watching it then, and I'll probably do a review with my friends and put it up on the channel most likely, but it's going to be a pretty good birthday, hopefully. We'll see. More movie news. We've got Rouge One. The final trailer came out, and it's basically, as you know, a prequel to the original film, the people that went undercover to try and steal the plans for the Death Star, and one thing that I've been really excited about since I saw the first trailer, which, by the way, the first trailer is probably still my favorite. I thought it was really awesome, the way they kind of blended the two themes with the light side and the dark side together. I mean, I'll admit, that probably has gotten my fanboy urge growing more significantly than it was every time I see more stuff. It's like, the more I see, the less interested I am in the movie. But the thing I'm excited the most about is the thing about Star Wars, which has always been kind of frustrating, and anybody that has read or experienced more of the expanded universe over the decades understands this. I think a lot of people, for a long time, they were just kind of limited to the films. That's all they knew, and maybe some people knew some of the cartoons or games, maybe. But there's always been this huge expanded universe where all these different types of worlds and races and situations and different types of stories were explored in the massive Star Wars universe. And it's one thing that I think Star Trek has always had over Star Wars is that within the main context of the actual canon, there's just a lot more to work with because, well, it was mostly television shows as well as movies. I mean, with Star Wars, it's like you've got the main movies that everyone knows, but let's face it, they're more or less the same. Even, with going with the same pattern where everything is based on a franchise we already know, so originality is a little bit harder to find. Force Awakens was essentially the New Hope remade, which kind of makes you think, okay, well, they're just basically going to do the same movies again. Rogue One kind of gives us the opportunity that maybe we can explore some different types of movies. In all honesty, I'm actually more excited for Rogue One than I was for Force Awakens because it's a different type of story. It looks like it's actually a dark, undercover, espionage, honestly, more of a war movie. And let's face it, even though Star Wars has gotten dark, it's never really gotten that dark, at least not since Empire. And we want it to get darker. I mean, I think I'm not saying that everything has to be dark to be good. I mean, I like a good darker story, but my point is that with Star Wars, there's just so many different varieties of stories you can tell beyond the same basic stuff where it's people with lightsabers fighting and it's related to the Skywalkers and Solos. And I know some people are going to be like, oh, that's all, that makes Star Wars awesome is the lightsabers. And you're not wrong, that's like the main hook, but there's a lot more stuff to be explored than just the Jedi, just the Skywalkers, and the Solos. And I know there's probably going to be some people that are going to be mad about Rogue One for not having that, but you know what? Sometimes you got to mix it up. I mean, one of the most popular characters is Han Solo, and, he's kind of almost the exception to the rule compared to all the Force stuff. I know, but the point is, I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping it's good. It's at least something different from the Star Wars canon we'll get to see. Also, a little bit of news I saw. Apparently, there's some news that the Aquaman movie was described by one of the producers as being a swashbuckling adventure, which seems accurate for what you could do with Aquaman. But let's be honest, though. I just think it's kind of hilarious that Aquaman is even really getting his own movie. Like, I know Aquaman has his fans, but I always found that to be more ironic. Like they like him ironically because he's so silly, and that's kind of the joke with Aquaman is that he sucks. But you cast Jason Momoa, and you cast Khal Drogo as Aquaman, then okay, it's one of the moves that DC's doing right. And with the DC movie universe, you guys know that I've got my issues with them. I don't know. I can't really say that on the list of priorities, my expectations for the Aquaman movie are particularly high, but, at least they've got a good actor to go along with them, so that's something. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but I was actually searching through different websites here to have some news to talk about, and as you guys know, my primary function on this channel is to discuss anime stuff, and as I was looking through the Anime News Network, I kind of came to this realization that I'm a little out of the anime loop, at least the modern anime stuff. Like, as far as modern shows, there's not much I've been watching, and I guess for this newer season we're coming into, I've got no idea what, any of these shows are, at all. It's bad. I have no idea. But there was one or two pieces of news that I could talk about. The first one is kind of more video game related, but as you guys know, I've been playing Persona 4 a bit, and I really like it. And I'm kind of sort of a fan of the Persona series. I think they're pretty well-written, fun games to play. And I know Persona 5 is coming out soon, and there was some recent news that it was casted, for the English dub, so that means it's getting even closer to being released. So I know a lot of Persona fans are going to like that. Me, because I'm always behind on video games. I don't know if I'll be playing it anytime soon, but it's good to know. The only real big anime news that I thought was worth talking about that I had anything to say about was in regards to Dragon Ball Super. Now, I haven't really been keeping up with Dragon Ball Super, even though I heard the new arc was good, I guess. I mean, I think people were saying it's essentially good because something sort of interesting is kind of happening. But I know that there's an evil Goku clone, and is there an evil Kaioshin now? I don't know. I see clips, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to wait for the dub. I know some people might be like, oh, you're not hardcore, man, if you're not gonna watch it now. Like, I'm perfectly fine with the sub. I was actually watching quite a bit of Super when they were doing the tournament, and it was fine. But I was just like, it's not. Nothing was really happening to make me say I have to watch this right now. It's, as my one friend Hero jokes, it's just kind of like Dragon Ball, standard. Dragon Ball okay. Like, it's all right. Once I've heard some people complaining about new stuff now, and I will eventually watch it. I'll eventually talk about it, but I've got enough on my plate. I'll wait. But the good news is, though, I might be watching it sooner because apparently after the fusion with Funimation and Crunchyroll, that means that Dragon Ball Super will be on Crunchyroll, which means I should be able to watch it. I'll actually be able to catch up and watch Dragon Ball Super, and I might be more inclined to do it because one of the reasons I also didn't want to do it is because I'm really trying to refrain from watching it illegally because I know that does hurt the industry, and Sean Schemmel made me feel bad about it when he talked about it at the con earlier this year, so I'm trying to avoid it. I know that's a big debate, but you know what? I'd rather just watch Crunchyroll and, give them some support that way. But yeah, I have been feeling like I've been a little out of the anime loop in that sense, so hopefully I'm going to get back into it. I know Jojo is on Toonami, so that's going to give JoJo more exposure. Hope build up the fandom there because, as we all know, JoJo is awesome. Apparently, some people were complaining about the first episode that it was slow. And, in all honesty, the first part, I don't know. I kind of like part one. I like Jonathan. I like the introduction. I mean, it doesn't get more ridiculous and crazy until part 2 and 3 anyway, but the first arc is good. It's good for establishing things. Personally, I think it's better to watch part 3 and then get the backstory with the second part than the first part. That's kind of the way I was introduced to it, but I don't know. I think it makes it seem like there's more meaning and you kind of understand things, but there are, of course, a variety of ways to do it. Chronologically is always good, too. Apparently, there's also a new Deathnote movie, so they're continuing that as well. And one of the things that I've heard many people sort of discuss is how the ending of the Deathnote film is actually preferable to the manga and anime, which I agree, because as I have, I think, said so many times, I really hate the second half of Deathnote. Like, I think it's a fantastic series that just kind of shot itself in the foot, and I just can't get past it. And I feel like I've been saying the same thing for like a decade now, but it's still how I feel. Like, it's one of those little things that's probably never going to change. But apparently they're continuing things even further, and, that's good. I mean, Death Note fandom's still going strong, I guess. No doubt about that there. No matter what your thoughts on it are, I suppose. Going into the world of video games, as I said, I'm a little behind on some things, but there were some things that I thought were worth reporting. The review for Civilization 6 is actually being done now, so I guess they're going to be working on the first bugs and trying to get the word out about what's positive and negative about the game. I know this has been in development for some time. Civ fans are probably waiting for it. I've actually been playing a lot of Civ 5. It's the one game I've been playing at all recently, and I've really been enjoying it, so it'll be cool to see what new modifications they have, and I'm hoping it's positive, because I know that the Civ series has also had some mixed responses as well, but Civ 5 has been pretty good. Also, big news, my one buddy, King of Kilps, passed this news to me, which I saw a trailer of it recently. Battlefield 1 is apparently going to take place during World War I. Now, this isn't something I've talked about much, but I am something of a history buff, and when it comes to like the Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, historical first-person shooters, it's always World War II. It was World War II done to death, which is fine, and then they decided to just kind of skip to modern day, and it's been that. All these interesting wars and conflicts you could kind of use as a platform, and he always just kind of did the same thing. You have World War II and then skip everything else. World War I is probably, like, historically one of the most, well, honestly, it's the second biggest war in the world. It's the First World War. It's literally one of the most important and bloody events in history, and it gets completely overshadowed by World War II. Like, I know World War II was worse, and I also think that the clear divide between good and bad is a little bit easier for people to see. I mean, you had the Nazis, which were essentially the best personification of evil that ever really existed, and you had everybody trying to take them down because everybody agreed these guys were bad, we have to stop them. And in a lot of wars, things are complicated, and there's always other factors, and there's always other people who have investments in things and motivations behind things, and governments are always out for themselves. That's true, but World War II is one of those few instances where historically good kind of rose against evil and won. It's like one of the few times in the history of the world where it's pretty much agreed that's what happened. World War I is just a much more complicated war with the treaties and the trade disputes and the the royal families and, well, just kind of the bloody nature of it, the fusing of the different ages, kind of the end of old warfare meeting the modern stuff. It's just a very complicated, dirty war where the good and evil idea isn't really there. It was just kind of a bunch of greedy leaders that didn't like each other and a bunch of people that were associated with each other who wanted to fight each other. The point is, World War One is a very complicated, but very interesting conflict that isn't really talked about much in history. I guess among, in school we didn't talk about it too much, and in conversation, it just gets overshadowed. And in video games, I just always thought that the trench warfare element was always really interesting. Admittedly horrifying in real life, but would be really interesting to explore with the video game. I mean, the stuff was bloody in World War II. Might as well give World War One a chance. And now we finally are. The aerial combat looks pretty cool. So, based on a little bit of in-game footage I'm seeing, I hope it's good because because we really do need some more good World War One games. I also can definitely see that gaming really is slowly advancing towards really kind of boosting virtual reality. We've got PlayStation VR, so I haven't heard anything about how well that works. I saw actually this one demo of kind of being on the bridge crew and you can interact with some of your friends and pretend like you're flying the Enterprise. I was like, I know that only hardcore Star Trek geeks are going to like that, but that would be freaking awesome. They actually had some of the cast members of Next Gen trying it out. I think LeVar Burton was there. Oh, it was so cool. So, I mean, if the VR stuff works well, I mean, that is the next stage in gaming, and once it gets really good, we're all going to be plugged in. It's going to be like that movie As Extends. Good film reference there if you guys ever seen that. As is the story, recording in this podcast, I'm behind on everything in my life. Comics. There's only one thing I really felt like was noteworthy to talk about when I was looking through stuff. Apparently the Prowler is getting his own comic. I'm pretty sure he's gotten comics before, but Prowler's gotten a reboot, and Prowler #1 you can purchase, you can check out. If you guys don't know the Prowler, he's kind of like a side character in Spider-Man who looks kind of cool. He's just kind of a martial artist guy with a purple mask and gloves and a cape, and he looks cool. And yeah, I've always liked the Prowler. He's a good little superhero. He should get more love, I guess. Maybe he'll get a movie. I'm sure he will eventually. Though I did finally manage to catch up on a couple things. I was trying to pay attention to some of the little polls that I've been doing on Facebook, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do a full video. I wanted to originally for this, but upon thinking about it, there just wasn't that much for me to talk about. It just didn't seem like it would be much of an impressive video. So basically, I'm going to do a brief review of the request the AnimeHero had for New Fist of the North Star. Now, what this basically was is some of the newest Fist of the North Star content. It's a sequel to the original series, I believe, in an OVA format. It's 3 episodes, about 45 minutes long for each one. And the setup is basically just a standard Fist of the North Star adventure. Like, as I was watching it, I'm like, well, this is pretty much Fist of the North Star. You've got a village that's full of these farmers who are trying to struggle. They found water, but there's some bad tyrant that's trying to force himself upon them and rule them. And, he's this tyrant, and Kenshiro comes in and is like, oh, they're hurting these innocent people. I have to save them because I'm the savior. And so he fights the guy, and the original guy is just kind of this, stereotypical Fist of the North Star guy, like, I am strong, therefore I will, be the strongest and be domineering over everyone. And, of course, Ken takes him out easily. And then, so the first part of the OVA, I'm like, all right, well, that was okay. But I'm like, this is incredibly basic. I just felt like I watched an extended episode of any of the TV show. That's like your average episode of the anime. That's what Fist of the North Star is. Bad guys bullying some random villagers. Kenshiro comes in, then destroys them. That's pretty much the way it goes. But the second part introduces the second villain, who's this mysterious guy who's kind of this rogue air temple priest guy who, of course, is one of the best martial artists of his particular area. And he says, I'm actually have a grudge against this guy. I'm going to go in. I'm going to take everything that's his. So Ken basically destroyed one dictator just so another one could come in. And this other villain is just completely evil. He just wants to cause pain and destruction. He wants to just create this whole society where he's crushing everyone beneath him. He's totally evil and loving it. And that's because he just has this terrible grudge against his father, who basically threw him off a cliff. It's terrible. And so I can't say that he's like the most complex villain, but compared to the first one, who we learn a little bit more about later, he is more interesting. He's at least entertaining. And, of course, there is an interesting subplot where I guess the main character, Toby, is this guy who is sort of the guy who's trying to rebel against these people that are ruling the town. He actually has been looking for his brother, but it turns out that the original villain, the dictator, was using his brother, who appeared to have these magical abilities, and claiming that he was a god, and using that child's influence to allow him to sway the people to be ruled by him. And, of course, the twist is, oh, it's my brother, he's being used for this. And it's interesting, this guy starts off to be a pretty nice guy who just wants to save his brother, find him again, and he ends up trying to use his brother for the same thing so that he can incite a war, just so that he can get his brother and rescue him. He's willing to cause all this bloodshed by using religion and indoctrination and people's beliefs to turn them against each other just so he can rescue his brother. And Ken even tells him, you should do this. And my biggest believe it or not, my biggest problem with this is the guy's like, I'm sorry, Ken, I've got to keep you out of this because I know you're going to try to stop it. So he tricks him into going to this temple and locks him in this cell with these iron bars and an iron door. Right? Okay. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is actually holding Ken. And they demonstrate that it's some really strong metals, some really thick walls. And I'm thinking to myself, look, I have seen Kenshiro, take down these giant guys with like a single pinpoint by poking them in the right area, just briefly. He can make their brains explode, okay? And I have literally seen this guy have buildings, have like mountains fall onto him with him continuing to walk with absolutely no damage. He doesn't care at all, not even remotely. The guy is a beast. He's one of the most overpowered anime characters of all time. That's what's great about him. And you're telling me that he's going to be held back by steel bars and a wall? I understand for the plot you had to keep him out of it for a little while, but I'm like, that was the most BS thing I've ever seen. Anyway, there is kind of a twist, though, where he ends up getting killed by a henchman. Toby gets killed, and there's some redemption there. And there's kind of a twist where we learn that the villain was so enraged because his father was actually the original dictator, and that's why he wanted to get vengeance on him. And there is a fair amount of violence in the OVA, of course, but it doesn't really get good until the final fight. And the thing about the final fight is, because this is a sequel to the first series where Ken has basically become the ultimate master of everything, and he's defeated some of the worst villains out there, Shin, Souther, Rao. After you get past these guys, you can't really topple that. And instead of trying to make this guy somebody who's on Ken's level or maybe even more powerful, they're like, no. He's fine. Like, they even say that the guy that he was killed, his father in the first part of the OVA, was actually more powerful. So Ken's basically just going pretty easy on this guy, and there's no possibility that he's going to get hurt at all. So there's that point, but then there's some redemption where he learns forgiveness, and he decides to kind of accept everything and realizes the error of his ways. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but it kind of reminded me of the Fist of the North Star movie where they kind of did that with Rao, which was kind of out of character, and I'm just like, is this kind of a recurring theme for this? So I guess I would say I had mixed feelings about the OVA. I thought it was pretty well animated. I liked the voice acting because you don't usually see I watched the English dub, and you don't usually see much of an English dub for North Star, and I thought the voice acting was decent. I thought some of the actors weren't very good. Like the female character, I liked, but she should have left at some point. Like she just gives up on escaping. I mean, she's not Yuri anyway. That's side point. The voice acting was okay. I think the voices worked for the characters, but the acting could have used a little bit more guff. I have to say, I thought Ken's voice actor was good, and I know they were going for the deep masculine voice, but he always sounded so irritated, and I guess after everything he's gone through, it's understandable, but in the sub, Ken has a very quiet kind of voice, and it's very gentle, and despite him being a bigger, tough guy, he actually has this soft heart, and this one, it's just like, I am really mad, and I'm like, all right, well, they're conveying a lot more frustration now, and it just, in all honesty, Ken seemed to be a little more scary with that voice to me. It was a little off-putting, I have to confess, but On the whole, I thought the plot was decent once it got going. I think that the idea of religious exploitation and manipulating the masses for your own gains is an interesting idea, which North Star has explored before, but not a lot of time was devoted to it. It was kind of a side issue. The twist is like all right, but it doesn't really. Once again, I don't think it's explored quite enough. I like the fact that the twist was a way to kind of resolve things so that Ken just doesn't make the guy blow up again, and we see him taken down violently, and there is a slightly more upbeat, hopeful ending, except for Ken kind of saying he is just destined to keep wandering the earth forever, Mad Max style. We see that as something interesting, but then again, don't we tune into Fist of North Star generally to see him make people's heads explode? So, I guess you could say my feelings about it were mixed. I was happy to see some newly animated Fist of North Star material, but at the end of the day, it was either just kind of average stuff that we've seen before that was kind of rushed, kind of interspliced with some really interesting moments. On the whole, though, I'd say it was decent. Not fantastic, though. On another bit of anime news here for things that I recently watched, I finally checked out Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and this will be my first impressions for that series. Now, much to my surprise, and I'm sure some other people's, and I'm going to say please don't, throw torches at me right away. Okay, I'll say this. Legend of the Galactic Heroes kind of opens up as sort of like a Star Trek / Star Wars fusion combined with elements of Dune. And what I mean by that is, if you saw David Lynch's Dune, where he kind of opens up and explains to you the different allegiances and the different planets and the different characters and what's going on, imagine that element of complication, but instead of like that just being roughly 3 to 5 minutes of exposition at the beginning, which I admit is a little clumsy, but I think sets things up very well at the same time, imagine that same kind of technique stretched out over an entire episode. What I mean by that is it introduces, you have this particular group, they're fighting this particular group, there's also this group which is kind of neutral, you've got this character and this character who work together, and you've got that character and that character, and then you've got these characters, oh, and by the way, here's this character, and then there's this one, oh, by the way, there's another one, and there's going to be this guy's name, even though he's not going to say anything, so how am I going to remember him? You can see where I'm going with this. Okay, so basically, the first episode is just establishing everybody's name, okay, and there is some kind of battle that is being talked about, and we see brief snippets of it, but in like the 25 minutes of episode, there might have been like 2 or 3 minutes of action. Now, I am not always an action junkie. I can appreciate slower moments, I can appreciate establishing things, but the only 2 characters that I really knew, I think, were supposed to be the 2 characters in the beginning, and I actually felt like there were these other 2 characters, which was a commanding officer and his subordinate talking about why they shouldn't launch this attack because it's a foolish move. And even though I suspect they were minor characters, even though I suspect that, I felt there was more of a connection with them than with any of the characters that were supposedly supposed to be more important. And I can understand that, there are different people and different rankings, and you're going to look at things from the politician's side and from the general side and from the lowly space pilot and the engineer, and you've got 20 to 30 different characters with different stories that are going to develop over this 150 episode epic. I get that. But I'm already suspecting that this is going to be one of those things where you're going to have to break out your notes and keep track, because I'm telling you, the 2 characters that I felt any kind of semblance of connection for within the brief story that they had within this episode, I swore that one of them got killed when they actually had some action and the ship exploded, but I believe that was another character that I was just introduced to. There was one moment, okay, where there's this one character that you're introduced to. He's like a minor soldier, and there's this beautiful image where he dies, and there's this little device which creates a holographic image of his wife, and it falls into the flames as he dies. That was a powerful image. That's the most memorable thing about this episode. And there were a couple lines about how in the infinite universe, all this massive battle is completely meaningless, and all this philosophical, intricate stuff. And I'm like, well, I will admit that sounds very profound, but it's not exactly compelling me to watch the rest of this show when you guys don't even seem that interested in your own war. And I know they're supposed to be detached because they're like these aristocratic nobles. But literally, most of those guys, if they're the main characters, the leaders, they're so dispassionate. Oh man, I'm telling you. Now, it's like, I feel like it could be very interesting potentially because they're all these characters, but literally, there must have been 20, 25 characters that names came up, some of whom only got one or two lines, and there literally was this one guy who looks incredibly evil. His line showed up. He was listening to these two other guys at a table, implying that, okay, he's going to be planning something against them. He didn't say a thing. It's his name. And so, on one hand, I'm intrigued, but I'm like, wow, here's a character. Like, I don't remember any of these characters' names. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of really being something that I think is accessible to a wide audience, it definitely is not. I mean, I feel like Legend of the Galactic Heroes, I think among hardcore anime fans, particularly ones of like hardcore science fiction, I mean, I feel like they might consider it an exclusive thing, because it definitely is not for the faint of heart. Like, if you guys are used to your standard, like, shonen action series where you've got young protagonist with an issue who has to train really hard, fight a guy, and then meets his master, and then that's the first episode. This is standard, like, beyond standard. It's intricate, establishing an epic space opera. That's what it is. But generally, I kind of like even my space operas to kind of start off with like a couple characters and have like a whole story fleshed out, maybe between one or two or three groups within an episode, instead of introducing all of our characters in 25 minutes when there's no possible way that any one of them can get a significant amount of screen time. So I feel like if there's got to be new characters introduced, I wish they would have done it gradually. So I get that it's going to be big, and this is kind of like the opening act of a play. I get it, but I don't think it works very well. I felt intimidated, and I'll be honest, I felt a little bored. I actually had to pause at about 8 minutes in, come back to it another day to finish it. Now, I'm not saying that I'll never watch any more, but I feel like Legend of the Galactic Heroes, at least right now, seems like it is going to be a bit of a chore. So I know as a hardcore sci-fi person and I like Dune, but Dune, you see, even though there was a lot of information, there ultimately only were like a couple groups of characters. There was the good guys, the bad guys, and occasionally one or two other people that popped in. It wasn't like you didn't have like 25 people to keep track of right away, who you can't remember any of them. So it seems potentially interesting. I think I can see why some people might hold it to some esteemed value, but it is not for the faint of heart. It is not an easy thing to get into right away. I will keep trying, but my first impression of Legend of the Galactic Heroes is, I don't know, it's going to be difficult. Oh, man. Talking about something I know a little bit about, the Berserk anime recently ended, and from what I watched of it and from what people have told me, it seems like the consensus is pretty much that, well, the anime story follows the manga pretty well, which I can agree with. It captures the dark tone. It flows pretty well. It's a good series for what it was. However, the animation kind of is weird. It kind of, I'll be honest, I don't like it. I don't want to say it's the worst animation I've ever seen, because objectively speaking, that is a lie. I couldn't say that. However, I'm sorry, to do this kind of CGI 3D anime style and make it look good, you really have to put some detailed effort into it to really pull that off. I really do think that CGI, and if you're trying to emulate a particular style, you either have to be immaculate and extremely detailed with it, or it should just be used to enhance other things. I think traditional 2D animation, especially for anime, just looks better. That's why most of it is kind of done that. Even digitally enhanced, that style just works. I will admit, the original anime, it's not like the highest budget anime ever, but I would rather watch those episodes, and even when they just did that cheap trick where they would have action and then cut to a still that was like kind of an awesome detailed sketch, kind of like the manga. Technically, yes, that's lazy, but it looked aesthetically cool. You got the cling clang of action for certain scenes. Okay, we can't afford a couple frames of action, but we'll have this awesome manga still that's colorized. You know what? I can live with that. I honestly can. And I'm not saying that it was always bad, but it just looked awkward and robotic. And you guys know me, when it comes to the animation stuff, I'm not the biggest stickler. If it at least looks decent and isn't distractingly bad, I can give it a pass. I care more about the plot, the story, and the atmosphere, whether it's live action or animated. But visually, it just looked too awkward to me. So I hope that there's more Berserk on the way. I wonder if the manga's going to be completed soon. I know it's in no rush to be completed, but we'll see. I have to say, yeah, Berserk is actually kind of going to be a segue into this little part here. I'm not sure what else I'm going to talk about, but I kind of said that I was going to give myself a little spot at the end here just to kind of ramble. But I wanted to kind of share Berserk memories because that was also something you guys wanted to hear about. Berserk is one of those anime that I saw at kind of an interesting time in my life. I saw it towards the end of my college career. It was kind of around the time that I was starting to really get back into anime again and start to kind of re-exploring my interest in it. And I had heard about Berserk. And all I really knew about Berserk was that it was this kind of dark fantasy manga that was known for being really dark and really, really violent. That's all I knew about it. I'd heard about it for years. I'd seen stills. I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. But I somehow missed the fact that there was an anime, even though I knew it was like legendary. I guess I was intimidated by it. It was also kind of at a time when I wasn't quite an expert on these sort of things. Anyway, I knew a little bit about it, and I checked it out. I actually sat down and watched it. And, I got so absorbed into it. I liked the music. I liked that creepy intro where you have the evil godlike being echoing about destiny, and the introduction to Guts as this badass warrior who takes down this evil Cobra demon guy. And then you get his backstory about how he's introduced to Griffith, and he's a mercenary, and he's had this messed up life, and they're just kind of battling their way in this sort of medieval fantasy world where there's this element of darkness and evil magic kind of under the surface, but it's mostly implied. And you've got the relationship and how it's all culminating into his ultimate betrayal when he kind of literally sells his soul to the devil and just becomes this creature, becomes one of the God Hand, and then it just becomes that ultimate cliffhanger of Guts will basically go to the ends of the earth to avenge his friends. And I always found it kind of fascinating how Guts kind of ends up hating Griffith for kind of giving him everything he ever wanted. He was the first person to make him feel like he had a purpose beyond just being a wandering killing machine, fighting to help this man achieve his dream of maybe uniting the world, because he seemed like this great guy who built himself up from nothing to achieve status in the nobility and gave him friends and family, and then literally sold them all to horrible death. I mean, like, what about the ultimate betrayal to have this guy elevated to this point of just seeming like the best person you could possibly be, and see that ideal completely squashed? It's kind of one of the reasons why Guts and Griffith have this really fascinating relationship, and what makes Berserk one of the great revenge tales, I think, which I hope culminates pretty well. But I'll say, I remember, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I remember no other anime. I mean, well, there have been some other anime that have been depressing, but no other anime have I watched that has caused me to be depressed so quickly, so immediately. Because I remember that ending, which the ending is more or less after the eclipse anyway. I mean, there's that little epilogue thing, but let's face it, the ending is basically really dark and dismal and doesn't leave you with much of a sense of hope. After that anime ended, I felt so depressed. I remember for a whole day I was completely depressed because of this show, and that is quite a profound effect to have on me. Like, a film or a show might have an effect on me, but it just kind of hit me, and literally for like a whole day I was just completely down in the dumps. And that's a completely unique experience. So I think Berserk really is a great manga. I think it's a great anime. It's one of my favorites. It will probably continue to be. I kind of wish the continuation was in a similar style. I hope that they can expand and contain more of the manga, because there is more they definitely could do. I've got a feeling with Berserk's popularity still continuing to grow and come back, we'll probably see more in the future. As far as other stuff I want to talk about, oh yes. Another show that people wanted me to talk about was Batman, and Batman the Animated Series specifically. And I've been wanting to do videos on a couple of these shows, but I feel like Batman the Animated Series is one of those shows that everybody kind of talks about. I kind of have another show that I want to talk about, but it seems to always get kind of glossed over in the polls. So, I don't know. What can I really add about Batman? Batman the Animated Series, I mean, yeah, it's kind of up to the ante in terms of really just making shows, cartoon series more for adults rather than just for kids, and when you watch them, it's purely in mind. I went back and watched a couple of the episodes of the first season and kind of establishing the seeds of what would become the fantastic DC animated universe. And I have to say, you can definitely tell that it came from an age that was not too far away from Transformers and He-Man and G.I. Joe. Like, it's definitely darker, it's definitely more serious, but the early episodes of that first season still have elements of cartooniness. You know, there is a sophistication, but you can tell that it did take them a while to really kind of follow through. But they really did up the ante and push these dark themes and really helped introduce Batman to people in a serious way. And them, along with the Tim Burton movies, I think really helped establish Batman as a serious, darker character again, and kind of getting him past his campier days. But if I had to pinpoint what it is specifically about Batman that I think kind of really sets it apart from everything of its time and makes it so important. Honestly, I think there's a general atmosphere of kind of keeping almost this timeless noir feel where it feels like it's fusing 1950s technology with the 20s, but you're not really entirely sure when it is. It's kind of in its own particular universe. I remember watching it with my one friend years ago, and we always kind of made that observation, like we don't really know when it takes place. It's sort of almost in its own contained alternate universe. I think the thing that Batman the Animated Series does well, more so than any show before, any show during, and a lot of shows afterwards, is how well it conveys hopelessness. And I know that sounds like a really depressing thing to say, but it's honestly one of the few children's shows, so to speak, that I think really does it that well. It's obviously a dark, serious show to begin with, and a lot of the episodes are kind of disturbing. Some of these episodes are just so bleak, but it's captured so perfectly. A couple of the examples I thought of were just some of the episodes where they really bring the tragedy to some of Batman's villains so adequately to life. I mean, you had Two-Face, who was this individual who had a lot going for him. He was obviously the pinnacle of everything that Gotham had to offer, something which The Dark Knight went into much more detail about. But in the Two-Face two-parter, you really see that he snapped. He was under a lot of pressure. There was a lot of subdued stuff, and they managed to convey that very well in a way that kids would understand, and I think might even scare some younger kids, and adults can fully appreciate it. It's presented in a way that is for everyone, and, well, maybe even a little more so for adults, and that's just something you didn't see in the early 90s. You just didn't. This is a dark, disturbing show about a guy with split personalities dealing with childhood trauma who gets horribly disfigured, his life gets ruined, and then he goes on essentially a murder spree because he's completely insane. And Batman feels completely guilty about it because it reminds him of his own parents dying. And that scene, which has been talked about before, where he connects the guilt with the feeling that he can never save his parents, which obviously is something that connected to Batman, and Batman kind of wakes up from that nightmare. It's like, why didn't you save me? Like, and Batman's gasping, like, oh, like that is some intense stuff. And then you've got, of course, Mr.Freeze, who, was essentially a joke character in the comics that Bruce Timm and his team turned into the legendary villain we know today. And just the tragedy of Freeze as his life was taken away only because he was trying to save the one person in his life that meant something to him. And some of those lines where, like, Batman's like, why are you doing this? Is it worth it? It's like, oh, to never again feel the warm breeze in your face with a warm hand to hold. Oh, yes, I'd kill for that. I mean, like, oh my gosh. I mean, like, I confess that, yes, Mr. Freeze is a very angry person, and he's doing some evil things, but I can honestly relate to that statement. I'm like, these are basic human things that require you to be a person that exists. Everybody deserves to feel physically like the warm breeze on their hands, and to feel comfort and to feel loved, and to never be able to touch the person you love because you're an ice cold monster. I mean, like, and she's like frozen and basically dead. She's dead. She was taken from him, the one person he loved. At least it's implied in that episode. That is just, it's so disturbing, and it shows how complicated it is, because Batman doesn't have a response to that. Like, well, you're still doing something illegal and you're trying to kill people, but this guy did completely ruin your life and turn you an inhuman monster, and yeah, I can see your mind snapping and how you feel you have no choice. You've kind of given up on life, and yes, Mr. Freeze only lives for vengeance. That's all he has. But that's kind of what makes him compelling, because he wants vengeance, because his ability to be a normal human being has more or less been taken from him. And I know that's kind of debatable, but you can really see his perspective, even though he's wearing this silly 1950s sci-fi costume. I mean, how many shows could do that? Not many, and even so, even some of the original characters they created, like the episode with Baby Doll, where she's this young girl, actually this fully grown woman, who had this particular disorder where she was unable to grow. She's stuck looking like a child forever, and she had this one point in her life where she was the star of this TV show, and that was the only moment in her life that had any success to her. And she has had no success being appreciated as an actress or as a person, and she's made fun of, she's humiliated. Basically, the idea of trying to recapture your past glory days, and also trying to overcome a disability that kind of mimics things that really exist, it's difficult, and you can see how difficult it is for this woman. And those final moments where Batman is chasing her, and she goes into the Hall of Mirrors, and she actually sees the image of herself as she wanted to be, and she just kind of like shoots the glass, and it shatters before her, and she just breaks down crying, and Batman just goes to her. And she literally gives up, and she's crying, and I'm getting teary talking about it. And she goes up to Batman, and she just kind of kneels in it and goes into his cloak, and she quotes that line from the show, which kind of encapsulates the best moment of her life that she's so desperately clinging to when she was almost treated as normal, and when her disfigurement made her life seem more worthwhile to her because she associated with that. And she's like, I didn't mean to. And it's just kind of that slow pan out to show how small her image is, and how helpless she is, and how Batman who's been chasing her, and she's done these violent things, and you'd think he wants to just, like, Batman, he's this cold guy, he would just, beat her down, he'd hurt her, he would say something mean like, I don't care, but Batman just embraces her and just kind of like holds her head there, and it's just to show that he understands like what pain she's going for, and she's lost it. It's not her fault, and he kind of understands. And that's the thing. I think that I admit I like my Batman cold. I like my Batman bitter. I admit that I do, and it is obvious that after all the things he does, one of the things that the DCAU does well is the slow growth of Batman. He becomes more of a badass, but also a much colder individual who won't let people in as you get to Justice League. But it's those little moments that you're like, Batman really does care about people, and he doesn't want to assume that everyone's evil. And he really, even though this person is the criminal, she's also kind of the victim of circumstance and of life, and he's been there, and he can relate. I mean, this is some heavy stuff. I mean, yeah, it's more commonplace for comics to be accepted as exploring deeper themes in the mainstream. I'd argue that really Marvel movies don't really usually do that. It's still fun popcorn stuff, which is also what comics are about. But in the early 90s, for any show to tackle something with this much depth and layer and complexity, and not all of it blatantly stated, a lot of it kind of implied through imagery and music and voice acting and direction. In the early 90s, what other cartoon in America was doing this? Really? I mean, like, that's the reason why Batman is so highly regarded today. One of the many reasons. So I guess if I had to say what separates it and makes it so important, I think it's just kind of capturing all that complexity, but just how hopeless and bleak life can be, but that there's still something to kind of fight for despite it, because of that human connection. Yeah, Batman gets pretty intense when you, especially when you really dwell on it. But I guess you could say that about just about anything. But yeah, that's my Batman discussion there. Yeah, as far as other things go, like I said, life's been busy. I'm trying to do some requests. I have a couple people on Patreon, a couple people giving me donations, so I've got a couple movie reviews. And as you guys know, because of copyright issues, I haven't been I haven't been uploading as many videos on the channel, even though I want to. I am thinking though, because I think people don't like that. I haven't been getting as much comments from you guys about your thoughts. If you guys would like me to do more videos with slideshows on the channel, I can do that. But I think for the people that are actually, trying to pay me and support me, I'm still going to put videos up on my site just because I don't want them taken down, obviously. But I do want to get more videos back on the channel that are anime based. And once again, I want to open up for requests. If you guys have any shows you'd like me to talk about or any types of videos about anime or anything, just let me know what you guys are interested in. I'd like to hear from you guys. I also completed my first film project. I posted a bunch of videos on the channel. I think I might have even lost some subscribers because of that, but whatever. Yeah, it's this fun little horror movie I made with my friends. Feel free to check it out, make fun of it. That's perfectly fine. But I promise there's going to be less of that. More normal videos coming soon. I am also working on some music stuff, and I am continuing to write short stories, which I post on the website, and my first novel, which is a superhero satire sort of thing, which is nearing completion, and I'll have more details about that later on. In the meantime, you can check out the Phantom Group for anime collab discussions with some of the cool people over there. You can check out my Film Fanatics podcast, where I talk about weekly movies with my friends. And yeah, if you guys have any other comments or questions, just leave them below. Let me know your thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed this little podcast. Alright, guys, Merlin out. Stay magical.